Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and today we're going to look at Google Sheets and how text and numbers align within the individual cells. Now, as a default, text aligns to the left and numbers align to the right, but occasionally you may want to change things around just as a cosmetic kind of thing. But with really large spreadsheets, sometimes you want to change that alignment just so you can get a little bit more on each printed page of a report. Now, if you're coming from Excel, don't worry, because the buttons in the alignment group in Excel are going to correspond directly to the buttons on the toolbar and the menu bar options that we are going to look at today in Sheets. As we look at this example spreadsheet, we can see that this is a way to track a job search. And I was just trying to remember some of the things that I needed to keep track of. The longer you look for a job, the more you need some way to track what you have done in the past and what you want to do in the future, and what was that company's name, and how do I contact them again, and all that kind of information. Now, usually when you're on the job hunt, you're even looking, for probably 3 to 5 jobs a week, and that can get to be quite a list, which is why my information is going to the right instead of down, because eventually all of these rows will fill up with where I am trying to apply. So I started with 3 jobs that I looked at one day and decided, okay, these are the 3 we're looking at, and then it has the position that I applied for or that I want to apply for, depending, and how I found this company. And in this case, I just looked at 3 of the online companies that are known for job searches, but it could also be just, the local newspaper. I was walking down the street and I saw a sign, whatever it is, how I found this company. And then I split it out into some of the company information as well. And so we have the name, the street, state, zip, that kind of thing, the phone number, the contact information. You don't always get that, but if you can get it, that can be kind of use to you from time to time. Now, when you submit your resume, sometimes you submit it directly, really kind of feels like through the website, as opposed to sometimes they send you a link that then you apply directly on the company's website instead. And once in a while, you can see that when you apply, that you're really not applying to the company's website directly, but you're applying through an employment agency. And so sometimes those details are all really helpful for you as you go back and review and try to remember what you've applied for. Occasionally, they will ask you if you want to include a cover letter, and you may decide not to on some of the jobs, but on others that maybe you really want, you may say, oh yeah, I've included a cover letter as well. And there might be other information that maybe you've decided to upload a portfolio, for example. So keeping track of all of those details can really help you as you develop this list. And then there may be some other employer requirements. There may be some assessments, for example, that you may need to take. I know I bumped into a couple that, well, I think they were looking to see how honest I was, but a pre-qualifying assessment, or you may run into a company that says, well, we want to be sure that you're really detail oriented, so here's a personality test. Are you the personality that we are looking for? And there may be other types of employer requirements as well. And then once you get to a certain point, you might actually be able to have some interviews, and anymore you may find that that is a phone date and time, and so I've left a couple of columns for that. And then I thought, well, maybe there's some sort of online date and time that I would use, like maybe I would do an interview over, say, Zoom, and then I might actually eventually at some point here have an in-person interview as well. So those are some of the basic pieces of information that I might want to keep track of. But what we're going to do is look at this spreadsheet and then figure out how we can make it prettier, maybe a little more useful, and talk about some of the ways that we can edit and format the text and numbers. Let's start by looking at the column headings in row 3. And as we said, text is going to align to the left. And actually in row 4, if we look at the dates, which are considered a type of number, those all align to the right of each cell. Well, it could be that I like having all of my column headings aligned to the left, but a lot of people would prefer to have column headings centered within the cell. So let's start with A3 that I've just selected, and then we're going to go, well, to the right of middle in the toolbar, kind of above column E here, and we have a horizontal align button. Now it has a drop down, so even though you can tell that that button shows left alignment, if we click on the drop down, we get 3 choices, and one is left, but the other is center, and then there's a right alignment as well. Well, for date, let's select center and click, and now date is centered within that column. And you might decide that that works really well with what you want to accomplish. On the other hand, you might decide that since date is right aligned, actually the dates are right aligned, that you might want to have the word date right aligned as well. If we do that, then it gives us a way to narrow down that column so that if you're worried about how much you can put on one sheet when you have a very large spreadsheet, this helps you narrow the columns down so that you can get more on a single page. So let's look at that as well. Let's go back, and you can see now that that button has changed, and it even looks like centering as opposed to left alignment. Well, we'll click on the drop down and go to the third choice here, right, and now it's aligned to the right, so we have a lot of extra space where we could indeed narrow down that column if we wanted to. Now position, I would think then would be centered, so let's go back and center it. How I found this company right now takes up that entire column, so I think we'll just leave it alone. Let's see what else. Phone is another one over here on the right that is left aligned, but phone numbers aligned to the right. So again, we might decide that phone needs to be centered or right aligned. Let's try centering that one. And then we could scroll to the right again. Let's then switch over, and instead of using the toolbar buttons, use the menu bar. And we're going to find something kind of interesting here. So let's go up to the menu bar and look at format, which is how we're going to change the alignment within the cells. And we'll click. And then a little more than halfway down this drop down, we have align. And as you go to the right, you can see that again we have the choices of left, center, and right. But we also, to the right of those words, have the keyboard shortcuts. Now left, Control-Shift-L, is probably not too mystifying. And right then, Control-Shift-R, well that makes sense, going along with the pattern for left. But center is Control-Shift-E. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense. You would think it would be Control-Shift-C, but Control-Shift-C is already used by some advanced features. So, the only way that you could center then is by using some other letter, and Control-Shift-E is what they've selected. Well, we could indeed then go to, let's say, one of the choices over here, for example, other, and let's go to format, align, and center. And then we could scroll over to the right a little bit more. And again, for date, we could either center or right align that, but let's go back to format, go down to align, and then It shows us that it's left aligned. Let's at least center that. And then as we scroll to the right, the rest of those column headings are very wide, so we'll want to do some other things before we choose left, right, or center for those. I've now taken us back to the beginning of the spreadsheet, and as I looked at the spreadsheet, I realized that having the same size of font all the way through was kind of making it difficult to tell what was a column heading as opposed to what was the text underneath that heading. So in rows 4, 5, and 6, we still have the default font size of 11, but starting in row 3, I enlarged the text a little bit, thinking maybe that would help. So in row 3, the default is 12 point, and then we go to row 2, and I've changed that to 14 point, and then in row 1, I got really brave and changed that to 18 point. Now, when I enlarged the font size, then in places, especially in row 1 and 2, where especially in column A, I have a lot of text all kind of jumbled together, it makes it a little hard to read what's going on and differentiate between cell A1 and A2. Well, what I can do is, besides making the row taller, which I do that by coming over to the row numbers and then resting my mouse on the bottom border of the row that I want to make taller. And when I do that, I get a thick blue line on that border line, and my mouse becomes a double-headed arrow. Well, I'm going to click and drag down to make this row taller, but it added space at the top of the cell and not at the bottom. Well, then I could come down to row 2 and do the same thing, because then that should also add space at the top, and my text is then at the bottom. And overall, I think I have more separation now. Now, some people will tell you that instead of changing the row height, they like to add a blank row between, say, rows 1 and 2. And if you are in a place where I am at the beginning, where there are no numbers or no formulas involved, that probably works all right. But if you need to have some extra space, visual space, and you're in the spreadsheet itself, adding a blank row can cause issues. So I'm going to caution you against adding blank rows and instead changing row height. Now, because my job search, for example, is on the bottom line, the bottom border of that cell, it still looks a little funky, I think. So what I'm going to do is go to the toolbar, and just above column E and just to the right of where we changed our horizontal alignment, we can change the vertical alignment by using the vertical alignment button. And it looks like an arrow pointing down, so it's even showing that right now the default is that the text is going to line to the bottom of the cell. Well, let's click on the drop down arrow, and we have 3 options. We can align to the top, we can align to the middle, and that even has 2 little arrows pointing to the middle. And then we have the bottom, again our default, and it shows that because we have a light background behind that choice. Well, let's go to middle and click, and notice how my job search has now moved within that cell. Now we could also move to the top, so let's try that as well. And look, now the only thing about aligning to the top is now I don't have much space above the text, and all of the extra space is at the bottom. Now that can be a great tool, and we'll talk about it a little later, but for right now I think I'm going to just align to the middle. Now, if you're in the neighborhood of the menu bar, you may decide that you don't want to use the toolbar, and you can certainly make these same choices by going to the menu bar. So let me just select row 2, and I'm going to do that by clicking on the 2. And then we can go to the menu bar, and in the middle of it we have Format. And then we can go down a little bit past middle here of the drop-down menu, and we have a line where we've already seen left, center, and right, but below those choices we have top, middle, and bottom. And again, I'm going to select middle and move that text to the middle of its respective cells as well. One of the things that I might like to do is to center my job search over a printed report, and so center that title over the first page. And it would be really hard to take my job search and say, guess, do I put it in C1 or D1? Where is the exact center of that page? Well, what we can do is select, and I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and use my right arrow as I go over to, say, column G, and I think that would be about the end of a first page. So I'm going to put it there. And then what we can do is go again sort of by column E, and as we look at the toolbar, we want to go to the left of the horizontal align button, where we have a merge cells button. Now when we click the drop down, we can merge all, or we can just say merge horizontally. We could also, if we'd selected cells vertically, we could merge vertically. But what it does is it takes all of the cells that I've selected and it merges them into one cell. So let's merge horizontally here. And those of you coming from Excel are going to say, yes, but why can't I merge and center? Well, in Google Sheets, it's a two-step process. So now that we've merged the cells, we can go back to our horizontal align and center. So same effect, but just two steps. Now we might decide to do this same idea, but use the categories instead. So for example, where I have search, and that's just a category here within the first 3 columns, we could go up to Format in the menu bar and then go down below Align to merge cells. And again, we have these same options of merge all, merge horizontally, merge vertically, or you could also unmerge, and you could do the same thing with the toolbar. Well, let's just merge horizontally, and then again, we don't have that ability to center unless we go to center, so let's do that. And then I'm going to go to the company information. I have a few more columns with this one, but again, I could really just click on the button. It should merge the cells, and then I can center. And then let's go farther and go to the resume submitted details. Select those cells, and again, just click on my merge cells button, and I want to center that. And then the last section here is employer requirements. Oh no, there's one more. And I could merge and center. And then we have the interviews. So let's do that as well. And just for practice one more time, let's go to Format, go down to Merge Cells, and merge horizontally. And then let's even go to Format, Align, and Center. And now we have all of those different category names centered within the different sections. Now let's look at a formatting option that you might use from time to time. It seems to me that I see this occasionally, say, with attendance books, where the column heading is a date, and then you put just, say, one character for attendance. Or you may use this as an option if your column headings are wider than any of the data that is within that column. So I've selected here the different headings. They're in row 3 that are basically a phone date and time or an online date and time. And I would like to put those at, say, an angle, so I could even narrow the column down a little bit. And again, I'm looking at conserving space on a printed page when it comes down to it, or even conserving space just so I can see more on my monitor at a time. So now that I've selected those cells, I'm going to go to the text rotation button, which is just to the right of all of the other buttons that we've been looking at. And when we click the drop down, the first choice is just none. We just keep the text the way it is. But let's look at our first one here, which is to tilt up. So when we click on that, it's about a 45-degree angle, I suppose, and the first word in the heading is at the bottom left, and then it tilts up to the right. And you'll see here that if I wanted to, I could then narrow down that column, and it would save some space. And in places where I couldn't even see all of the words, I can now see all of the words that were in that particular column heading. So it can be a nice way to help people just see what is going on in your spreadsheet. Well, that was to tilt up, but we could also tilt down, so keep those selected. And this is a little odd in what it does, but the first word is going to be in the upper left, and then it tilts down to the lower right. And again, you can see that we're seeing all of the words where before we couldn't even see all of the words. There is also then to the right of that, stack vertically. This one takes up a lot of space, but let's look at it. So now each letter that is in that column heading is just on top of the one next to it. And so you could do a lot of column adjusting, but it makes that row so tall. So generally, unless you have a really short column heading, that's not the best option. Now let's also look, because we could rotate up, and that has everything to the left of the cell. It almost looks more like if we were going to create a chart that we might be tempted to use this, but it depends on where your data is and how much data you use. If you only had one character or two within a cell and you wanted to get that long column heading, that would be a great option. Well, that was up, but we could also rotate down, which just reverses where the first word in that particular column heading is. But again, for really small contents within a cell, but much longer column headings, that is a great choice. And then we have the different custom angles that we could use, so that we could click a drop down, and then we could simply say, do we want to rotate it by 15 degrees, 30 degrees, 90 degrees, whatever, and make a choice and have that fit within your spreadsheet. But I'm going to just come back to none. Keeping those same column headings selected, we could also, if we chose, go to Format in the menu bar, and then down below Align and Merge Cells and Text Wrapping, we again have Text Rotation, where we have the same options of None, Tilt Up, Tilt Down, Stack Vertically, and that maybe even explains it a little better, but stack vertically, rotate up, rotate down, and then we have a list of all of the different kinds of angles that we could use. So whether you use the toolbar or whether you use the menu bar is up to you and what makes you more comfortable about making choices. I think I may rotate up. And then we can narrow this down and just take up a lot less space within our spreadsheet. But again, it's all up to you and how you want to format your particular spreadsheet. I've returned to the beginning of my spreadsheet and then scrolled down a little ways, because I did promise that I would explain that I would add a tip for aligning cell contents to the top of a cell and why that might be helpful. So with my example here, I have some cells that are aligned to the bottom of the cell. And then I have one cell that within each row has a lot of information. And right now that lot of information isn't even close to what could happen. I've seen spreadsheets where that one cell could be the entire page of when it's printed out. So the problem is the larger the spreadsheet, and while everything is aligned to the bottom, it becomes difficult because this text is on the bottom, this text is on the bottom, and your eye wants to immediately just stay on the bottom, but the beginning of that cell is at the top. And people start getting confused how things line up. Even if you add borders, they're still just a little confused. So one of the best things you can do is select all of your cells and then align them to the top where you have the vertical align it to the top of the cell. So now, as I read across, I have a single line, and then I have the top of this much fuller content. And then I know that when I'm on the next row, I have this little bit of information, some more information, and then the top of much fuller information as I read across. So if you run into information into spreadsheets where you have very little pieces of information in some cells and a lot of information that is wrapped in other cells, probably the nicest thing that you can do for somebody who's going to read the contents of your spreadsheet is to align all of the cells to the top so that it's just easier to read straight across as people read that information. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning, where you will find great online resources that include Universal Class, lynda.com, and Learning Express Library. Tune in each week as we introduce new videos on a variety of tech topics. You can find us at 1 o'clock on Wednesday and Friday and 2 o'clock on Tuesday. Be sure to find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, or if you prefer, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at MCPLMO, where you can find our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist.